Welcome back to Prove It To Me. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Law. If you look around any major city, college campus, and honestly even the suburbs these days, you are going to see them. I am convinced that they reproduce in the dark. They are scattered across sidewalks, abandoned in decorative bushes, and occasionally zipping past you at 15 miles per hour, piloted by a guy in a business suit holding a half-calf oat milk latte. I am talking about, of course, electric scooters. The e-scooter revolution is well underway, and with any new mode of transportation comes a whole new wave of incident data. I was scrolling through Safety and Health magazine recently, which is a fantastic publication, by the way. I read it all the time. And I came across a short news brief titled, "Younger Boys Are Most Likely to Be Injured on E-Scooters," study finds. Now, trade magazines do a great job of giving us the highlight reel. They give you the quick, actionable bullet points you need to stay informed while you're drinking your morning coffee before the daily site walk. But they only have so much word count. A 300-word news brief simply cannot capture the nuance of a 10-page peer-reviewed academic paper. So, I did what we do on this show. I pulled the original study to see what was left on the cutting room floor. And it turns out, the highlight reel missed the actual game. Today, we are going to look at the original peer-reviewed paper. We're going to look at the massive limitations of the database the researchers used, and because I know what you are thinking, Dr. Law, why are we talking about 12-year-olds on scooters when we've managed to be consistent recently in talking about occupational safety and health? I promise we are going to tie this directly into OSH. Because if you think micromobility isn't impacting your workforce, your commuting risk, or your campus safety programs, you are kidding yourself. Let's get into it. Let's start with the summary provided by the Safety and Health magazine. It hits the big, flashy numbers perfectly. The article states that researchers at Johns Hopkins University explored e-scooter injuries among kids using data from 2020 to 2024 from a nationally representative sample of U.S. emergency rooms. The big takeaway? Boys 17 and younger accounted for nearly 71% of the more than 2,100 recorded injuries. They noted that around 42% of those injuries occurred in 2024 alone, which is a massive, aggressive spike. They break it down a bit further. Kids aged 11 to 14 suffered 38.3% of the injuries. The most common ailments were fractures, dislocations, strains, sprains, and soft tissue injuries. Then, the article quotes the study's co-author, Dr. Mary Beth Howard, from a press release. It says, use of e-scooters also increases the risk of traumatic brain injuries. Contributing factors include greater risk-taking and less frequent use of helmets. The article concludes by saying these incidents support the move by local governments to place age restrictions on e-scooters. On the surface, that makes perfect sense. Boys do dumb things. I was one. I have the scars and the lingering joint pain to prove it. I won't even pretend I'm innocent as an adult living through this e-scooter revolution. Fun fact, I have never been on an e-scooter while completely sober, and I have almost always ridden them, ironically, with a group of other safety professionals who were also not completely sober. E-scooters are fast. 13-year-olds refuse to wear helmets because it ruins their hair, they fall, and they break their arms. Therefore, we should restrict the age to ride them. It is a neat, tidy narrative, and exactly what a news brief is designed to deliver. But then I downloaded the actual study. It was published in the journal Injury in 2026, authored by Mary Beth Howard, Laura Pritchett, and Joanna S. Cohen out of Johns Hopkins. The title of the paper isn't Boys Get Hurt on Scooters. The title is Disparities in Incidence and Severity of Electric Scooter Injuries in Children. The primary focus of this paper wasn't actually about behavioral risk-taking or helmet use. It was about health equity and systemic infrastructure failures. When you read the actual study, you find a slightly different reality regarding the data. First of all, the news brief puts a heavy emphasis on traumatic brain injuries. Yes, head injuries happen, but they were not the predominant outcome by a long shot. Head and neck injuries only accounted for 8.8% of the diagnoses. The vast majority, over 77%, were musculoskeletal like fractures and soft tissue injuries like lacerations. But more importantly, let's talk about helmets. The press release highlighted the lack of helmet use as a contributing factor. But do you know how many times helmet usage was actually measured in this study? 0. In the limitations section of the paper, the authors explicitly state, additionally, NEISS does not capture helmet use, riding behavior, crash location, or other contextual factors that influence injury risk and severity. The researchers were referencing other observational studies in their discussion section that show e-scooter riders generally don't wear helmets. This is a highly logical assumption, but it wasn't a finding of this dataset. Now, let's look at the nuance that got left out of the magazine. The entire point of the paper was to examine socioeconomic disparities. The researchers hypothesized that Black and Hispanic children are overrepresented in e-scooter injuries, and the data supported this. Black and Hispanic children accounted for about 16% of the e-scooter injuries, whereas they only represent about 13% of all pediatric injury mechanisms in this specific data set. Why does this matter? Because context matters. The researchers point out that e-scooters are an affordable mode of transportation, often concentrated in urban areas. Furthermore, infrastructure disparities, like a lack of protected bike lanes and poorer road maintenance, elevate the risk for these specific communities. It's not just kids taking risks. It's kids using these devices in areas with hostile infrastructure, increasing their exposure to hazards. That is a systemic root cause, and as safety professionals, that's the gold we are looking for. Now, while I appreciate the researchers' focus on infrastructure and equity, we have to put this study through our usual critical lens, because there are some massive limitations here that affect how much weight we can give this data. Number 1, the missing data void. If you look at Table 1 in the study, they break down race and ethnicity. For race, a staggering 24.2% of the cases were listed as not stated. For ethnicity, 29.1% of the cases were listed as unknown. Over a quarter of their data set is effectively a shrug emoji. They acknowledge this in the limitations, noting that it may bias their estimates, but honestly, with missing data that high, any conclusions about demographic overrepresentation have to be taken with a massive grain of salt. Number 2, the ER-only filter. The NEISS database only captures injuries treated in participating emergency departments. It completely excludes outpatient clinics, urgent care centers, and primary care doctors. We've all been there. Unless a bone is making a 90-degree turn where it shouldn't be, you're not going to the ER. You're taking your kid to the urgent care down the street to avoid a 6-hour wait and a bankrupting copay. Because this study only looks at ER data, less severe injuries are heavily underrepresented. We are only seeing the tip of the iceberg, which skews the perception of how dangerous these devices actually are. Number 3, hospitalization as a proxy for severity. The researchers tried to determine if injuries were more severe for certain demographics. To do this, they used hospital disposition, whether the patient was admitted to the hospital or discharged, as a proxy for injury severity. But American healthcare is a complicated beast. Using hospital admission as a metric for medical severity is deeply flawed. The authors wisely admit this. They state that hospitalization patterns are influenced by healthcare access, insurance coverage, and caregiver resources independent of clinical severity. If a child has a borderline injury, a hospital might discharge a well-insured patient to follow up with their private orthopedist the next day. Conversely, they might admit a patient who lacks resources to ensure they get the necessary care. Sometimes admission isn't about clinical severity. It's about whether the hospital trusts that you will actually have a safe environment to recover in. All right, let's bring this home to professional practice. Why should an EHS professional care about pediatric scooter injuries? Because micromobility is fundamentally changing how our workforce moves. First, the last mile commute. If you manage safety for an organization in an urban center, your employees are using e-scooters. They take the train or bus into the city and then they rent a Lime or a Bird scooter for that last mile to the office. While commuting injuries generally fall outside of OSHA recordability, they absolutely impact your organization. They impact healthcare costs, absenteeism, and productivity. The systemic issues identified in this study, poor infrastructure, lack of protected lanes, poor road maintenance, those apply to your adult workers just as much as these kids. If your office is located in an area with hostile infrastructure, your workers are at risk every morning. Tell your workers, we know you use these. Here is how to navigate the blind intersections near our building safely. Second, campus mobility. Many large tech companies, manufacturing facilities, and corporate campuses actually provide e-scooters or e-bikes for employees to get between buildings. Listen to me very carefully. The second your company provides the equipment on company property, you have adopted a massive occupational hazard. God help your workers' comp premiums if you haven't thought this through. This study shows that e-scooter incidents are rising rapidly, up to 42% in a single year. If you have micromobility on your campus, you need strict governance. Do you mandate helmets? This study proves that people generally don't wear them voluntarily. Do you have speed limiters programmed into the campus scooters? Are your walking paths truly separated from your vehicle traffic? You have to engineer the environment for safety rather than just hoping your employees have good balance and motor skills. Third, media literacy for safety professionals. This is the ultimate takeaway of this episode. Trade magazines like Safety and Health are vital tools. They are the appetizer that lets you know a topic exists. But if you are going to use data to justify a safety policy at your company, or if you are going to stand in front of your executive board and cite a statistic to get a budget approved, you must read the primary source. Check the limitations. Understand the nuance between systemic infrastructure failures and behavioral choices. Magazines give you the spark. It's your job to read the fire. That is going to do it for this episode of Study Finds. I highly encourage you to go read the full study. It really is an interesting look at how socioeconomic and environmental factors dictate risk exposure. I will link both the news article and the original Johns Hopkins study in the show notes so you can compare them for yourself. If you are dealing with micromobility on your campus, I'd love to hear how you are managing it. Shoot me an email at contact@proveitpod.com. Are you geofencing speed limits? Are you banning them entirely? Let me know. If you got something out of today's episode, do me a favor and leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps the algorithm and it helps other safety professionals find the show. As always, stay safe, read the methodology section, and I'll catch you on the next one. Prove It To Me is produced by me, Matt Law. Original music by Wes London. You can find this podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Like what you've heard so far? Please like, subscribe, and follow wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Got questions about what we talked about or research that you want to share? Send an email to contact@proveitpod.com. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and its guests and do not necessarily represent the official position, opinion, or strategies of their employers or companies. Examples of research and data analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based on very limited, often single use case, and sometimes dated information. Assumptions made within this discussion about research and data analyses are not necessarily representative of the position of the host, the guests, or their employers or companies. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast. The presentation of the content by the guests does not necessarily constitute an active endorsement of the content by the host.